Okay, we are going to talk about the carbon cycle today. So there's a few things we need to make sure we are aware of. So the carbon cycle has to do with our little element of carbon. It can be solid, it can be combined into different liquids, and it can be in gas form. And this word cycle kind of implies that carbon's constantly changing what form it is in. And so it's a cycle on the planet, on Earth, that this carbon, this element, is constantly moving from solid to liquid to gas, depending on what process is happening to it. So I'm going to start with the gas. So the most famous is this gas form of carbon called carbon dioxide. And plants will take in carbon dioxide gas and they will put out oxygen. But while they're doing that, the more important thing is they're making something, plant food, which is glucose, which also has carbon in it. C6, there's the carbon, H12O6. So we're taking in a plant is taking in gas forms of carbon and it's putting out a solid form of carbon for food. And so the plant uses this to grow and do its life, or some kind of animal or human or organism will come along and eat that plant or eat the animal that ate that plant, and the carbon will move inside this person. So now we've got carbon inside of us, and it has a lot of jobs it does. It's part of our DNA. We have a sugar phosphate backbone in our DNA. That sugar is carbon-based. We have a lot of different things. Our amino acids, our proteins, have carbons in them. So carbon is an essential part of life. So the essential elements for life is chomps or schnapps, CHNOPS, and carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, all the things in our biogeochemical cycles we're learning about. So, without carbon, there's no life. We are carbon-based life forms. So that's really interesting to keep in mind. Don't forget. Okay, so this carbon is in life, and we humans breathe in the oxygen that the plants give us, and we give back the carbon dioxide to the plant. So it's this relationship. It's an important relationship. Without plants, no oxygen, no us. Without us, no carbon dioxide for those plants. So this is a very big symbiotic relationship, right? Okay, so sometimes animals, plants, organisms, living things will die. And over time, they'll decay. And over more time, they'll get covered up with soil. And then they'll decompose, and the fossils start to become an oil deposit. And that's also carbon. These are called hydrocarbons. They're combinations of hydrogen and carbons and oxygen. And over time, these form in the rocks, and then we'll come along and we'll drill it out. And we'll put it in a factory and burn it. And so we'll take this liquid carbon, these hydrocarbons that are liquid, we'll burn them, and then we're going to put carbon dioxide, the gas, back into the atmosphere. That's part of the cycle. I'll draw arrows to show direction. So that's another thing that happens. So this carbon down here is supposed to be long-term storage, a long-term reservoir. it is not meant to come back out. It's supposed to be stored in the soil, in between the rocks, and stay there. The humans mined, drilled it out to find this awesome petroleum product that makes cars go, combusts engines, provides energy, makes electricity, also makes plastics, my favorite. And so we found all these uses, and it's easy to get, it's cheap, and it's really efficient when it's making energy. So it was like this wonderful thing, and that's what kind of led to that industrial revolution, right? That's why we had it, because we discovered this use. So long term, we've got this oil stored in between rocks and different layers. But the other place that it stores, like here, is in the ocean. So there's a lot of life in the ocean, and it also dies, decays, and builds up. So the two main reservoirs for carbon are in rocks, sedimentary rocks, which is where the fossils are, and the ocean, the deposits in the ocean. So sometimes out to shore you'll see that oil drill rig out here, and it's pumping oil out as well. Now another thing that happens is we burn a lot of stuff, like, and sometimes even in nature, forests will catch fire. And we have these trees, and then a fire will come. These are going to be my flames. And carbon dioxide, again in gas form, will come up because of the fire burning the carbon-containing forest. So that will also put more of these gases up into our atmosphere. So when the carbon is up in the atmosphere, this is part of the short-term storage. Anything that's not going to be in there for thousands, hundreds of years is going to be short-term. So carbon in a plant, carbon in life forms, those are all going to be short-term visits. Anything in the atmosphere, it's going to be in the atmosphere, and then it's going to get absorbed into something else and become more of a long-term storage. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So if you look over at our picture over here, organic things, which are life forms, are going to be short-term. And then anything in rocks or in the ocean, like that's deposited or settled, that's going to be long-term. Now, nature's got this perfectly balanced. The balance between long-term, let's pretend this is a scale. The balance between long-term and short-term is great. There's a give, there's a take, and it's all working out. The problem happens when we get involved. And when we get involved, we take it out of long-term and we tip the scale to a lot of short-term, and we're altering what the carbon cycle can handle and what it can do. So the problem is we are getting a lot more increase in carbon dioxide levels than are supposed to be here. It should be around 400 parts per million in our atmosphere, and it is increasing quite a bit because of burning these fossil fuels and putting the long-term storage back into the atmosphere. So that's a big talking point for our class. We need to stop it, and we need to learn that balance. How are we going to put things back where they were? The reason we don't want this carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is because it is considered to be a greenhouse gas. So carbon dioxide will warm the atmosphere, and that will cause climate change. It'll cause temperatures to rise in some places. It'll melt ice. It'll release methane. It will cause sea level rising. We'll get extreme weather events all over the world, and stuff will shift, and that's a big concern. So there are several greenhouse gases, but carbon dioxide is a big one because that one is thanks to us. So we have this human impact. And that's what we're kind of studying in this APES course. What can we do to reduce that? And we'll talk about that. So, bottom line, remember that there's a short-term cycle of carbon and the long-term. So there's these reservoirs where carbon is stored. Living things, short-term. Atmosphere is supposed to be short-term. Long storage is inside rocks and sediment in the oceans. So hopefully that's kind of a little overview. And this is 1.4, so make sure you look at all of the little details here. This is what I talked about, and I think that'll give you a good overview of the carbon cycle. Now start thinking how the carbon cycle relates to the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle, because they're all interconnected and they rely on each other, and it's important you can make that connection.